happy Tuesday, June 27th, 2023, and welcome to a brand new edition of what I like to call the Isolation Cabin. I'm your host, the vegan you believe in, Kurt Cadet, aka Conscious Kurt in the flesh as always. And here on the Isolation Cabin, I like to talk about the different forms isolation takes on, whether positive or negative, the effects it has on us and our mental health, and what we can do to have a better understanding and handle on it, to have a better quality of our lives going forward. So several weeks ago, I did an episode on this podcast about people who are emotionally immature. And I kind of want to further discuss that topic by talking about a different aspect of emotional immaturity. And that aspect I want to talk about today is people who always play the victim. This is something I've learned about a lot over the last year, and also something admittedly I've been guilty of throughout my life. And the more I've learned about it and the more aware I've become of it, the harder I've worked to not be that kind of person anymore and have a better handle on it. And also, the more disappointed I am when I see these qualities in other people. Unfortunately, a lot of people, in every single last story they tell, they always have to be the victim and always have to be the one who is done wrong. Anytime something bad happens to them, anytime something doesn't go their way, it's always the other person's fault. It's always something else's fault. They never did anything wrong. They never did anything to cause it. And none of the responsibility in any of those scenarios ever falls into their lap. And that's not to say there aren't scenarios where people legit are the victim and something legit bad did happen to them that was beyond their control. But when it's every single last story that's the scenario that you paint out, it's clear that the common denominator in all these scenarios is you. And when you have that many situations where things go wrong and that many times and none of it, not one of those situations is ever your fault, then you really need to look in the mirror and start asking yourself some questions. Because when you always blame other people for your problems and always act like the world is out to get you, you're giving all of your power and your strength away and putting it into the hands of other people and other circumstances that you have no control over. So the more you do this, the more powerless you are going to be in resolving your problems. And the less power you have to solve your problems, the longer and longer they are going to go on. So why do people like to play the victim so much? What is it about being the victim that they just can't seem to let go of? Well, a big reason why is because it gets them attention. In the social media world we live in these days, there are just so many people who are dying for attention, validation, all that jazz. They just gotta have it. For whatever reason, they just gotta have it. And if there's one group of people who are super guilty of this, it is the people who always act like they're the victim in every single scenario they get caught up in. And I see this play out in so many different ways, so many different scenarios, but social media in recent years has become a place where it does play out the most, where if somebody will post something about having a bad day or how this situation went wrong for them or that situation went wrong for them, and they point the finger constantly at other people about how they can't depend on other people and other people suck and the world hates them, the world wants them to crumble and fall apart. Yeah, when people constantly post these kind of stories and constantly talk about these kind of situations, they can get a lot of sympathy from it and a lot of attention from it. It's unfortunate, it's sad, but people will do the most desperate things just to get attention. The most despicable things also just to get attention. And when they act like they're the victim and act like everything is working against them, then they have an excuse to get more of that attention. As someone who doesn't like a lot of attention myself, it's just very weird to see people that obsessed with it and that addicted to it. to the point where they'll refuse to do anything to fix their situation or change their situation, just for the simple fact that constantly complaining about it and constantly crying about it gets them attention, gets them validation, gets them sympathy. And having that shit in some cases is more important to them than actually fixing the problem. And it's sad when people will stoop to that level just so they can have other people talking about them and telling them things like, oh, it's okay. Oh, it's not your fault. Oh, what a horrible person. Oh, I'm very sorry you went through this. I'm very sorry that you're going through these problems. Yeah, believe it or not, people feed off of that shit. And like I said before, I'm not saying there aren't certain scenarios where people are the victim and they are legit done wrong in a certain scenario. But then there's that. And then there's scenarios where it's clear that you just want to be the center of attention and you just want to be the one that everybody else is talking about. And that attention shit is hard to let go of. There's good attention and there's bad attention. And trust me when I tell you, that kind of shit is not the kind of attention you want. And hell, it's not even worth it. It kind of sucks, actually. And another reason why people will always play the victim and act like nothing is ever their fault is because it's easy. When something bad happens to you, when some shit doesn't go your way, the easy thing to do is to complain about it, bitch about it, feel sorry for yourself, and say things like, it's not fair, everybody hates me, what did I ever do to anyone to deserve this? Why is the world out to get me? Why is the world so mad at me? Wah, 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 wah. Yeah, because doing shit like that takes little to no hard work. When you stay in that attitude where you feel like you're constantly done wrong and the whole world has some kind of vendetta against you, then chances are you'll be less likely to try and fix your problem and do something about it. And in many cases, that's the easy thing to do. Because actually trying to find a solution and actually trying to do something to fix it may be hard and may be difficult and might require you to put in a little effort and actually try. But some people unfortunately just don't have it in them to put in that effort and actually do something about their situation. So instead they just take the easy route and act like none of it is their fault and that it's beyond their control. I know the easy route is always tempting and always seems like the best bet, but a sad lesson I've had to learn the hard way is that easier does not always mean better. So while it may be easy to feel sorry for yourself, have a pity party and bitch about everything in your life and act like none of it's your fault, constantly doing that shit is not going to get you anywhere. It's not going to fix your issues, and more than anything else, it will not make you happy. Being a victim, having a victim's attitude will get you a lot of things, but one thing it will not get you is happiness. And that's one of the biggest things that turned me off from that attitude and mentality, and one of the main reasons why I wanted to get as far the fuck away from that kind of mentality as I could. Because it may be easy, it may get you attention, but it doesn't solve anything. And it never will. And also a big reason why people will always play the victim is because it keeps them from actually taking any action. Piggybacking off of what I said before about how easy it is to feel sorry for yourself and act like nothing is ever your fault. Another thing about that attitude is that it keeps you from ever doing anything about it. It keeps you from ever putting your ideas together, putting your thoughts together, and actually trying to find a solution to your problem. So instead of finding a solution, you just sit there and you bitch, you moan, and point the finger at everyone, point the finger at everything. And while you're doing that, you're not making any progress. You're not getting anything done. You're not moving past whatever shit you're facing. And like I said before, taking action isn't easy. Taking action sometimes is not pretty. And because a lot of people dread taking action so much and are afraid of it, they choose to instead constantly complain about a problem that they're not willing to do anything about. Because taking action is the hard part. Taking action will require them to actually not be a victim anymore, not be a little bitch anymore, and actually do something to fix it instead of hearing themselves talk so much. But when you don't take any action, when you don't do anything about your problems to fix them, then they're never going to go anywhere. Nothing's going to ever happen. And then a year from now, 2 years from now, you're going to be sitting in the exact same place that you are right now. Because that victim mentality bullshit is for the birds. And you will not get far in life with it. So how do you stop being a victim? And how do you stop having a victim's attitude every time things don't go your way? Well, as opposed to what I just said before in my previous point, one of the things you need to do is take charge. The thing about being a victim and always blaming other people for your problems, as I mentioned before, by doing that, you give away all of your power and all of your control to outside people and outside circumstances. And when you do that, you don't have any of that power or any of that control to actually fix whatever you're dealing with. So instead of complaining and instead of saying, oh, poor me, you actually have to sit down and find a way that you can fix the problem. And the way you can fix the problem is by taking action and doing something about it. Because when you sit around all day and act like everything isn't fair and ask yourself, like, why am I in the position I'm in, or why is my life the way it is? You don't realize that you have in many ways the power to change whatever you're going through. By taking a step, even if it's a small step, that'll better your chances at finding a solution and fixing your problem than just constantly bitching about it all day. Because a lot of us don't realize how powerful we really are and how much control of our own lives we really do have. Well, the only way we'll see that power and see that potential within ourselves is by actually doing the work. And when you do the work and you have a doer's mentality instead of a victim's mentality, chances are you'll get a lot more accomplished. And another way you can stop being a victim and having a victim's mentality is by adopting a better attitude. As I've gotten older and grown out of being emotionally immature and also being a victim, I learned the big part of that is the type of attitude you have throughout your everyday life. So if you have a victim's attitude where whenever something bad happens, you just fall apart, you can't handle it, you constantly complain and bitch about it, and just sit there constantly feeling sorry for yourself, you're not going to be able to handle it. You're not going to know how to handle it. And you want to know why you're not going to be able to handle it? Because of your attitude. When you have a weak mindset and a weak attitude, then anything that happens in life is going to crumble you to pieces. But if instead you adopt an attitude where even if something bad happens and even if something does not go my way, I can handle it. I can find a way to fix it. I can work around it. And if it's something maybe you don't have any control over, you learn to just accept it. And I know acceptance isn't always easy. Acceptance is definitely something that's challenging for all of us. But sometimes when you just accept when certain things happen instead of falling apart when they happen, you'll have a better chance of moving on from it. And whatever that thing that happens to you may be will have less and less power over you. And as I've said before, bad things do happen to us. They definitely do. There are scenarios where we are the victim in a certain situation, and also there are many cases where we are done wrong by someone. But there's a difference between falling down and staying down. And when you choose to stay down and feel sorry for yourself whenever these things happen, then you are acting like a victim. You are acting like somebody who has no power, no control over their life. And whenever things don't go their way and whenever things do go wrong, it's just too much for them to bear. And definitely there is a mourning period when we go through these certain scenarios, but there's only so long that mourning period can last. And also a big way where you can stop being the victim is by holding yourself accountable. There's many cases where whatever happened to us, is our own fault. Maybe it's not all our fault, but there is some responsibility that we do bear in some of the things that happen to us. Like, for instance, a couple years ago, I had a situation where I was living with a person who admittedly was a huge pain in the ass and was a big burden to living with me more than anything else. And even there was a certain period of time where he didn't even pay the full rent. And he had been going through some health problems, so I kind of felt sorry for him in that regard, so I let it go. But the more time this happened and the more I allowed this to go on, the more bitter and angry I became and the more unhappy I became in the process. And granted, this dude did suck, and I don't have a lot of good things to say about him. He was a horrible roommate, but at the end of the day, it was my fault for allowing it to go on as long as it did. I could complain all day about how the universe was out to get me by putting this person into my life and how unfair it is and how shitty it is. But at the end of the day, it was my choice to let this person live with me for as long as they did. And as miserable and unpleasant as it was, at the end of the day, I do bear responsibility for that. And that's what I mean. There are certain cases where maybe things didn't go our way or that things didn't work out the way we wanted them to. And in some of those cases, some of it is our own fault. And when it is our own fault and we do bear responsibility for it, the only thing that you should do is accept that responsibility. Don't blame other people. Don't point fingers. Don't act like nothing is ever your fault. No, sometimes it is your fault. And when it is your fault, just own up to it. It is not that fucking hard to own up to when you mess up, to own up to when you screw yourself over, and do something to fix that shit. And I think I've said this on this podcast before. One of my biggest pet peeves in people is people who suck at apologizing and who suck at taking accountability for their own bullshit. And when you're someone who can't apologize and can't own up to their own shit, it's clear that you are weak, you are soft, you are immature, and you're a fucking child. That's right, I said it. You are a child if you can never take accountability for your shit. And when you're somebody who's at the age that I'm at, it's a damn shame. And more than anything, it's sad. There are some cases where we are the victim, but there are other cases when it is our own fault. And when it is your own fault, fessing up to it, realizing what you did wrong, and doing something to fix it shows that you're strong, you give a shit about your life, that you're mature, and that you want better for yourself. At the end of the day, whenever you're facing a problem and whenever you're facing a conflict, the main thing you should want to do is finding a way to fix it. Not being a victim, not feeling sorry for yourself, not having a pity party or saying, poor me, poor me, poor me. The most important thing to do and the most important thing you should focus on is finding a solution. And when you focus more on that, as opposed to pointing fingers at everyone else, then you'll actually get somewhere and you'll actually accomplish something. So whenever something bad does happen and shit does go sideways, it's okay to have a mourning period. It's okay to be upset about it for a little bit. But there comes a time where you need to shake that shit off, get back up, and handle that shit. And when you handle that shit, you will respect yourself a whole lot more. Well, that's all the time I have for today, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And as I've said before, I am not a licensed doctor or therapist, but I do have experience in my personal life dealing with a lot of these issues. So I do like to use this podcast to help out many of you who may be going through these issues so that you can have an easier time at overcoming them than I had. So if you ever want to talk to me outside of this podcast, you can feel free to hit me up on my Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Look up my first and last name, Kurt Cadet. Leave me a message, friend me, whichever you prefer. Also, you can listen to this podcast on Spotify as well as Spreaker and YouTube. Leave a comment on the episodes and let me know what you like about them, what you don't like about them. And for a very long time to come, I will be here talking about isolation, the good and bad that comes from it, and what we can do to have a better handle and understanding of it, to have a better quality of our lives in the future. So until next time, I'm Kirk Cadet for another edition of the Isolation Cabin. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And just remember, that victim's mentality bullshit is for the birds. And there's 1,000,001 better ways that we could be using our time. So until next time, take care, guys, and God bless.